Welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. This week, we return to the Pentamerone. This story is not suitable for children. The story is The Crab Louse, the Mouse and the Cricket. The Burton version of this story is summarised in his own words as, Nardello is sent 3 times by his father to buy some wares, with 100 ducats each time. The first time he buyeth a mouse, the next a large crab louse, and then a cricket. And being expelled by his father for this, he reacheth a city, where, by means of his purchases, he cureth the king's daughter, and after various adventures, becometh her husband. So, there's a farmer called Michonne, and he has a son called Nardello, and the son is a spendthrift and foolish, and when Nardello goes to the tavern, he picks the worst people to quarrel with. When he hires sex workers, he picks the worst and pays for the best. When he gambles, he's plucked by professionals, and he's wasting all of his father's money. How can he set him straight, he wonders. Hard work, he decides, so he says to his son, take this sack of cash to Salerno, and buy us some calves, and in a few years, when they're oxen, we'll sow wheat and become corn merchants. Remember, corn in Europe is not sweet corn, maize from the Americas. It's just the generic term for whatever the local edible grain is. Leave it to me, says his son, and wanders off with a sack of gold. On the way to town, he sees a ferry on an ancient flat rock by a river, and the ferry is playing with a giant crab louse, which is changed to cockroach in many editions, because pubic lice are hilarious only in particular cultural contexts. The crab louse is playing a tiny guitar in the Spanish manner. I presume this is really a different instrument because guitars are from the 15th century. Let's say it's a stole. Nardello asks how much for the clever beast, and the fairy says 100 ducats would be fine, and Nardello says, by coincidence, I have right that much here. Take this bag o' cash. The fairy puts the louse in a little box, and Nardello runs home, certain his father will be thrilled with this purchase. The father is not thrilled. Nardello lays the box on the table and praises its contents, so the father expects there to be a rough diamond inside. When it's a pubic louse, the father is so angry he won't speak to Nardello any further, and demands Nardello get the money back and gives him 100 more ducats to buy 3 calves. On a side note, calves are really expensive in these stories. 33 gold ducats ahead, but moving on. Nardello heads for Sarno. Yes, I know the name of the town has changed. What can I say? One may be an abbreviation. On the way, he goes past a flat rock, and there's a fairy there, and the fairy is watching a mouse, and the mouse is dancing. It does turns and jumps and twists, and Nardello watches it with his mouth agape for a long while, and then offers the fairy 100 ducats for the mouse, and the fairy gives him a free box for the mouse and sends him home, and Michonne is not impressed, but he can't do much about it because there's a guest at the table who'll gossip if he loses his temper. He gives Nardello another 100 ducats and says, any more of your games, and I'll slap you so hard your mother will feel it. On the third journey, the fairy is listening to a cricket which sings like a nightingale. Nardello buys it, takes it home in a cage made of a vegetable marrow and some twigs, and his father picks up a stump of wood and whacks Nardello about the shoulder like, according to Burton, a rodomonte. This is a character from the Orlando cycle. He's a Saracen king who besieges Paris. He's a villain, but mostly for racist reasons. Nardello grabs his 3 animals and books it to Lombardy. In Lombardy, there's a Lord Cesone with a single daughter called Melia, and she has suffered a childhood sickness. Its lasting effect is she has not smiled for 7 years. So she's neurodiverse, and we can't be having that in fairy stories. Time to hand her off as a prize to some worthless nearby guy who has luck on his side. Anyone who can make her laugh gets her for a wife, says her dad, in what is an odd choice given that the whole Pentamerone has a frame narrative that is exactly the same. Why no one stops the storyteller at this point and says, the prince right there poured oil in the street to make a woman laugh, I don't know. Anyway, Cesone oddly ups the stakes. He says that if Nardello tries and fails, the mould of his hood shall pay for it. I'm not sure what that means. It's clearly a threat. Do you want her to smile or not, Cesone? Get your motivation together. The lad pulls out his boxes of animals, and the princess laughs heartily at them, and the father, who seems determined to be displeased by life, goes from being sad because she's sad to being sad because he now needs to marry her off to the dregs of humanity because of the ban, which the narrator does not mention again, that he himself wrote. You could have made it a cash prize, Gisoni. That's all I'm saying. To up the stakes, he says, okay, you can marry my daughter if you agree that, should you not consummate the marriage within 3 days, I can feed you to lions. At this point, Nardiello says he's not afraid of anything and agrees. He does not ask many pertinent questions, like, how do you have lions in Lombardy? Why do you have lions in Lombardy? And does your daughter know that you are feeding the men who want to marry her to the lions that you have in Lombardy? He does say, literally, for in that time I am man enough to consummate the marriage of thy daughter and of all thine house, which is an incest joke about having sex with the guy he's talking to, which was hilarious in medieval Italy. Possibly you decide. There is a marriage feast, and the king gives Nardiello opium, so that when the bridal pair retire, he just falls straight asleep. The king manages this for 2 further nights because, in addition to lions, he has poppy fields for days. Let's throw him to the lions, says the king, in what is clearly still murder. Nardiello has his pets with him, and so he opens the boxes saying, I'm about to die and I've nothing to leave you, so you should go free my beautiful animals. The animals, in the best Broadway tradition, solve their problems by putting on a show. The lions decide this is the oddest way to avoid being eaten they've ever seen, and there's no way the king is going to let them starve, and that it's lionesses that hunt anyway, and so they settle in to watch, and then the mouse speaks. It speaks in a flowery, indirect way that, given it's meant to be doing ballet, so fascinating that it saves a man from hungry lions, is difficult to believe. The gist is that the animals are magical and will save Nardiello because it's clear he loves them, and they talk about submitting joyfully to slavery because Italian nobles like that sort of thing. The mouse then bores a tunnel upward in the wall the size of a man so Nardiello can walk out of the den. It even cuts stairs in the tunnel, because if it's worth doing, you may as well go creative mode Minecraft. The tunnel comes out in a hayloft, and the animals ask him what he wants, and he says he wants more than anything in the world is that if the king gives Milia a new husband, he won't be able to consummate the marriage in the same way that Nardiello could not, so there the abused becomes the abuser. At the start of the story, I did warn you he was a lucky idiot, not a hero. The animals say that's easy, they'll do it. They ask Nardiello to stay in the hayloft while his cunning plan comes to fruition. At the court, the king has married the daughter off to a visiting English lord. That's 2 husbands in a week. No wonder Milia never smiles. It makes her dad murder people. The new pair go to bed, but the man has overindulged at the feast and he falls asleep. There's no actual mention of opium. The crab louse, hearing his snores, sneaks into the bed and opens the man's anus so that he has a watery discharge of dysentery into his bed and onto his bride. Told you this wasn't suitable for children. Moving on. The English lord is near ready to die of shame. He gets up, washes himself, sends for a cluster of doctors. The doctors agree that his symptoms are a result of overindulgence at the feast. The next night, the crab louse tries the same trick but is stymied. The lord has cunningly, on the advice of many valets, equipped himself with, quote, repairs of bindings, a bank of ribbons, and a trench of rags. The crab louse goes back to his fellows and he says he can't break into the man's body, so the mouse says, we need a good sapper to overcome these fortifications, and goes to gnaw through the cloths. Given that it has just constructed a tunnel with its teeth, the cloths provide surprisingly little resistance, and the crab louse then gives the man the same sort of laxative enema, and he stinks up the palace, and the princess sensibly leaves for one of her maid's rooms. In the verbose repetition so normal in these stories, we learn that the sheets were white and from Holland, but they now look like a Venetian tabby. The man, in what strikes me as a sign of great maudlin wit for someone who is blamelessly being raped by animals, says that the greatness of his house is being undone by the looseness of its foundation. His valets blame food poisoning that has caused the problem the previous night, and because this is his host's fault, he won't be blamed. But if it happens again, that would mean he's constitutionally incontinent, and that would embarrass him. They then scheme on his behalf and come up with a cunning plan. The Lord changes room and changes bed, and not all poppies in the world can cause him to sleep because he's too nerved up. He doesn't want the relaxation of sleep to get to him. It's not absolutely clear if he's taken the hump or death bet, thanks to Mel Brooks. One of his valets is a maker of bombards, and he convinces the man to let him make a wooden stopper, like those used for mortars, and the man puts it in place, and then he really can't sleep because it's uncomfortable, he doesn't want to dislodge it, and there's the chance he'll be eaten by lions. The crab louse speechifies a lengthy version of Alas, comrades, as he won't sleep, I have no time for my work, we are undone. The cricket then steps up and says, "Leave this to me," and sings a sweet lullaby, and the man nods off, and the crab louse begins his duties as a syringe. But he finds the way barred, and then the mouse heads to the pantry, anoints the tip of its tail with mustard, wipes it across the upper lip of the Englishman, and this makes him sneeze so strongly that the stopper comes out, flying out with great force. As he is one of those chaps who sleeps on his side with his back facing his wife, she is struck in the solar plexus with such force it almost kills her, and she screams. The king comes in, he asks what's going on, and she says she's been shot with a petard. A petard is a small bomb. It's a box filled with powder used for breaching doors, or a firework of much the same design. The king says that's impossible, so she pulls down the sheets and shows him the wooden implement, her injury, and the powder which propelled it. The king is disgusted and throws the Englishman out. I'm not exactly sure what the Englishman has done wrong in this scenario, or why an English lord has specifically been chosen to be the butt of the joke. He then starts beating his breast and repenting killing Nardiello, as he has clearly been cursed for his cruelty. In what to him must have seemed like an unlikely turn of events, a gigantic speaking pubic louse then tells him that Nardiello is alive and worthy to be his son-in-law. The king says that this beautiful animal has saved him from a sea of trouble and a pricking in his heart, and so the cricket goes to find the master and return him to court. The animals then give Nardiello a spell to make him a handsome youth, and the pair marry happily ever after. The moral is, more happens in an hour than 100 years. I promise you stats, remind you that these were stories for children, and say that my saga would vary.